Alright, welcome back. In the last couple of weeks, we spent quite a bit of time working with MySQL Workbench in SQLite in Python and R. But before we dive into NoSQL, we should discuss the differences between Postgres and MySQL. But first, let's review some concepts about relational database. Our relational database management systems support relational data model, which is a table-oriented model. The schema of a table, our relation schema, defined by table name, and we have fixed number of attributes with a fixed data type. We have entity, which is our record, and it is row in a table with value for each attribute. And finally, our relation is just a set of uniform records. So if we look at the most popular relational database management systems, open source, right? So MySQL and Postgres are the top two open source, most commonly used databases. They share a lot of similarities, but there's some interesting characteristics that set them apart. MySQL had been famous for its ease and speed, and Postgres has many more advanced features. And sometimes it's described as an open source version of Oracle. You're already familiar with MySQL Workbench, which is a GUI tool for MySQL. For Postgres, typically it's pgadmin. Both of them follow ACID, about which we'll talk just in a second. You notice full text search is limited in MySQL. And you're also familiar with auto-increment column feature in MySQL. So in Postgres, for instance, it's serial. Postgres has analytic function, and data types in Postgres has larger variety than just SQL standard types that we have seen and learned in MySQL. There are more features that if you're interested to look at, please follow the link. So the ACID test that both of databases follow the standard. So the ACID test ensure the standard and compliance for relational database management transactions. And ACID stands for atomic, where transaction must be performed in all or nothing manner. And if you think of partially completed bank transfer, so it has to be all or nothing. Consistent, transaction must be processed in uniform and consistent way. Isolated, transaction must be appropriately isolated until they're complete. If you have several clients completing transactions or purchasing the same items, all those transactions has to be isolated, right? And durable, we have to maintain record of any incomplete transaction in case we need to recover, right, if there's a failure. In addition, Postgres is an object relational database. In MySQL, we can define it as a purely relational. So what is the difference? Postgres offers more complex data types. And if you look at more complete comparison table, we have support for array and user-defined types. It also allows object to inherit properties. And of course, it makes it much more complex than learning and working with MySQL. So three common database features, views, triggers, and store procedures are available. However, PostgreSQL has more robust views and support materialized views, which you reviewed last week, and it can improve performance for much more complex queries. And as we mentioned, data type. So if you just need a basic characters and numeric data types, both databases will work for your project. If you need more complex data types, the Postgres will suit better your choice. So the big question is, if you develop an application and you need a database for your backend, which of the two database systems will work better? So here's a couple of suggestions. You can consider Postgres. Let's say if if you know for sure your application will need to scale up, right? You'll need a complex queries and perhaps frequent write operations in more complex data types, then Postgres is the better choice. If you do not expect your application to grow, or you need a quick tool for prototyping, you need additional third-party tools, perhaps, MySQL could fit better. It is more widely used, number one, and also, indeed, there's more third-party tools actually built based for MySQL. And here's a couple of examples of companies that implemented MySQL or Postgres. Because MySQL is in data storage, it's the most common, perhaps, application in data storage for web services. So we can see YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter using it as a basis of their dynamic web applications or presence. However, Postgres is growing in popularity, and there's a lot of company, Apple, Netflix, Spotify, are Postgres users. Interestingly enough, Uber switched from Postgres to MySQL. Let's look at additional features that can help you decide which application, which database management system to use. So for instance, Postgres allows multi-version concurrency control when you have different readers and editors at the same time using and managing database, which makes workflow more efficient. For MySQL, cloud platform offer MySQL features, so we can define it as a cloud-ready database management system. And of course, multi-version concurrency control is also available for MySQL, and it enable high scalability and flexibility as well. But if you look at the data size or database size, Postgres perhaps is well suited for large database, as it can manage many queries and process, right, more than 100K queries per second. For MySQL, what's more important is speed and reliability. So it was designed for this purpose, and that's the reason why, remember, certain SQL features were removed to keep MySQL lightweight. Postgres is good for complex queries versus ease of use for MySQL. And you'll see that many hosting providers offer MySQL as a default database system just for that reason. And finally, Postgres is a popular choice when you know for sure you need NoSQL features, different data types. However, MySQL, it is possible that certain choices, certain features will be in the future supported. For instance, NoSQL is also supported since MySQL 8. All right, to summarize our main key takeaway, so MySQL is typically recommended for web-based online applications, and Postgres will be recommended for large analytical processes. And we have MySQL defined more as a lightweight and reliable versus Postgres extensible and feature rich. So this is our summary. For Postgres practice, this is optional, but we recommend optional textbook provided in our Canvas site. Practical textbook that guides you, walk you through installation of Postgres, for which you will need to use a graphical user interface called pgadmin, and it walks you through very practical queries. Additional practice that does not require installation, it's interactive online practice, where we suggest to try out simple SQL queries. For instance, try out first with the simple SQL queries, perhaps aggregates and strings. You already seen a lot of differences that were mentioned in our textbook, SQL Cookbook, where each query was presented with the respective differences for, let's say, DB2, Oracle, Postgres, MySQL, and SQL Server. And we really hope that whatever your future database management system will be, you'll be ready to implement those skills. So in the practice platform, you'll be able to read the task. They also provide you with schema, expected results, and you need to come up with the answer with selecting all information from table facilities. So this is our answer. This site is very useful because it also explains how the query is built, right? And what you need to specify in order to obtain the task, which is great to improve even further your SQL query skills.